Bava Metziah Daf. We're holding Bahada Amar Rava. The Gemara asks, Bahada Amar Rava, but that which Rava said, if the garment was fashioned with gold threads, can they divide it? Does that also mean that they divide the garment themselves? By doing so, it would ruin it. The Gemara says it's not a question. Even if the garment is divided, it's fit to be made into a garment for the children of kings or wealthy people, therefore it's not ruined. What about the Tanam, with that which we learned, with regard to that which we learned, if two people were sitting on an animal, each of them claims to own the entire animal, they take a shua and divide the animal. Doesn't mean that they divide the actual animal itself. They are ruining it. So the Gemara says, by a kosher animal, if they divide it, you can at least use the basar, but if it's a non-kosher animal, shechting it and dividing the carcass would, it's ruining, and it's basically worthless. Rather, clearly divide the monetary value. It's in our case, where the psak is that they divide it, it means that the litigants divide the monetary value, not the item itself. Based on what the Mishnah said in Daf, Beis Amar Aleph, Amar Rabbi Bar Chami says, this is to say the case of one who performs an act of acquisition by lifting a found item on behalf of another, the other person, the latter acquires ownership of the item. If it enters in your mind that one lifts a found item for another, the other does not acquire the item, so this garment has not been acquired by neither of both litigants. It's each prevents the other from acquisition. If that were the case, this part of the garment held by one of them would be considered as though it's still lying on the ground. And the part of the garment held by the other person would be considered as though it was still lying on the ground. And neither this one or that one requires. Rather, you must say, if a person who performs an acquisition by lifting a found item on behalf of another, the person acquires the item. Rabba says, I can tell you, a person who performs an act of acquisition by lifting a found item solely on behalf of another, the other person does not acquire it. Now the reason that the two litigants acquire the garment is since each litigant of the acquired part of the garment he could acquire for himself, he also acquires the other part of the other one. Rav adds, no, that one who acquires an item for himself can acquire for part of the other, as if someone says to a shliach, say you're going to go and steal an item from me, the ganav and the agent and the shliach stole from him pater, the one who sent him is pater from liability due to the principle of that there's no ein shlichus d'dvar. What a case of partners who stole and together chayav and are both chayav if only one of them actually lifted the item. Why time? What's the reason? It must be because since he could acquire for himself, he could acquire for others. The Gemara says yes. Learn from here that this principle is correct. Rava says, now that you say this principle of migoi, one acquires part of an item for himself can also acquire for the other person. You could say, in the case of a deaf-mute and a mentally competent person lifted and found items simultaneously, since the deaf-mute acquires as part of the item, the mentally competent person also acquires his portion. The Gemara says, by deaf-mute acquires also the kamak das, as a mentally competent person lifted it for him, but how does a mentally competent person acquire his part? Rather say the deaf-mute acquires his part, but a mentally competent person does not acquire his part. What is the principle of migay? Since the migay in two general deaf-mutes who pick up an item simultaneously acquire it, this too, the deaf-mute acquires it even though a mentally competent person does not acquire it. So the Gemara says, what are you learning? If you want to say that a person performs an act of kinyan by lifting a found item on behalf of another, the other person acquires it. So, this is the case where the mentally competent person lifts the item with the intention of acquiring it for himself. But in the case, the mentally competent person lifted the item with the intention of acquiring it for himself, he had no intention of acquiring it for the deaf-mute. If he does not acquire this for himself, does he acquire for himself? Say that since the mentally competent person does not acquire any part of the found item, definitely does not acquire it either. If you're going to say, what case is this different from the general case of an item that was found by deaf mutes, in which they both acquire? There, in that case, this is a Chacham instituted a takana for them that they both acquire the items so that they will not come to fight with others who want to take them due to the fact that the deaf mute lacks the halachic ability to acquire the item. Here, in the case of the deaf mute and the mentally competent person, the deaf mute says to himself, even if even the mentally competent person does not acquire them, can I acquire it? Therefore, in that case, he will not fight if others take the item from him. He says, if you say that it's mashma for this case of the Mishnah, from where in the Mishnah is Rabbi Bar Chama learned this from? If you say it's from Shnayim Eichsim, over there, he's saying all of it's mine, and I lifted the garment first. And that one says all of that is mine, and I lifted the garment. How can the halacha where one acquires an item for another be inferred from that case? Rather, it's from the later case in the Mishnah. This one says all of it's mine. This one says all of it's mine. Why do I need this case as well? Rather, you learn it from the next case in the Mishnah. Lifting a found on behalf of another, the person acquires for himself. But you just said that the Reishis Metziah was saying Mekach HaMemkar. We would say it's talking about Mekach HaMemkar. If it's talking about Mekach HaMemkar. So what it's saying, he needs to solve that. The person who says Hetzer Shali can be considered like a Meshav Aveda, and it should be Potter. Therefore, you have to say that he's saying like this. If I say Yisavr, I'm in a Kol Shali, I'm going to have to swear it. To have a Meshav Aveda, be Potter. And as well, thereby be considered the equivalent of returning a lost item and be examined to take an oath. Therefore, the case is not extra. It teaches us the litigants is not considered the equivalent of one returning a lost item. Rather, Ram Rachama learns this halacha from this case. If two people are sitting on an animal, each of them claims that each is his. Each of them take a shvuah by the value of the animal. Why do I need this case? Mishnah Yiseda teaches us another thing. If you lift a found item on behalf of another, where it says, but perhaps the Mishnah teaches us the one who sits on an animal also acquires, even though he has not caused the animal to move. Rather, you learn it from the last clause of the Mishnah. When each of them admit the validity of others' claim, or when they have witnesses attesting to their claims, they divide without an oath. What case is the Mishnah referring to? If it's referring to a case of buying and selling, doesn't need to say. Rather, it must be Metziah. But if you could acquire for himself, he could acquire for another person. The Mishnah said when two people were sitting on an animal. One was sitting on an animal, or the other was leading the animal. Each one says that he owes the animals. They have to take a shvuah and they divide it. Amar Rabbi Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosef said, Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said to me, Shamas mina damar Shmuel tarti. I heard from two halachas of Shmuel that one who sits in the erotic position of an animal. First of all, rochav manik, one who sits in the erotic position of an animal. And the other halacha with regards to the one who leads it. Chad konim v'chad loy konim. With regard to one case, he acquires an animal, and in regards to another case, he does not require. I do not know which halacha applies to which. So Mer says, what are the circumstances? If you say it's referring to one who sits in a riding position alone, and one who leads alone, is there anyone who says that one who leads an animal alone does not acquire? Rather, if there's a case where it could be said that one does not acquire the animal, it's obvious in the case where one sits in the riding position that it could be said. Rather, this case is with regards to the case where one sits in the riding position of the animal while another leads it. What's that halacha? Rochav aduf. Does the one sitting in the riding position of the animal take precedence? As the animal is in his grasp. Or perhaps the one leading the animal takes precedence to Asli Machmaseh as it walks because of him. He says, next Anan, let us see. We can analyze this from the Mishnah concerning the Isser against leading an animal of Kilayim. Two animals of Kilayim, let's say a horse and a donkey, are harnessed to the same wagon. The one leading the animal gets 40 lashes. The one who's sitting in the wagon also gets 40 lashes. Meir Peter Meir deems the one sitting in the wagon exempt. Now, and from the fact that the version of Shmuel reversed up being taught, and the one sitting in the wagon potter, can learn from here that one who sits on an animal alone does not acquire it. And all the more so, one who sits on an animal while others lead the animal does not acquire the animal. And you say many times with regards to this halacha, let's see what the Armas Lam Shmei Rabbi Yehuda, and you not say the statement in the name of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosef had an illness that caused his memory loss. Some of his later statements of the halacha were inaccurate, and Abai suspected that he attributed the statement of Rabbi Yehuda by mistake. So he says, no, indeed, I remember. Rabbi Yosef, so he said to him, Rabbi Yosef said to him, Ibra, indeed, I remember that Rabbi Yehuda stated this proof. And I also remember that I said in response, how can the master resolve the case of one who sits on an animal by a proof in the case of one who sits in a wagon? One who sits in the wagon does not hold the reins. The one who sits on the animal holds the reins. And Rabbi Yehuda said to me in response, Rav and Shmuel both say, that holding the reins of a hefker animal does not affect acquisition. So there's no difference between sitting on an animal and sitting in a wagon drawn by an animal. Other people say, how can the master resolve the case of one who sits on an animal by a proof in the case of one who sits in a wagon? One who sits in the wagon does not hold the reins. Whereas one who sits in the animal does hold the reins. Holding the reins of an ownerless animal does not affect acquisition. With regards to holding the reins of an animal in order to acquire it, he acquires it. With regards to acquisition of a found animal, with regard to the acquisition of an animal that was the property of a convert, it does not kind. What is the meaning in terms of Meiseri, reins? Idi explained to me that they are used like a person who transmits an item to another. They are used to transfer the ownership of an animal. Grant in the case of one who takes the reins from another, he's kaina to come lechavri, as the other person hands them to him. In the case of a found animal or of one that's a property of a ger, who's handing him the reins, and who is handing him the reins, enabling him to acquire the ownerless animal. Since there is no transaction, one cannot acquire the animal by merely holding the reins. Asks the question, if we say that it's the opinion of Rameir, in his opinion, even one who sits in the wagon acquires the animal that is pulling the wagon. So Rachav is Kani. So the Gemara says, we're dealing with a case where the one who's sitting in the animal leads. This is the case of Manik. Manik. There are two types of leading. If you would say that Rachav is better, the Hamanik with because he's leading the animal and holding it. Ashvalan teaches us that the claim of sitting in the riding position of an animal is not stronger than the claim of the one leading by the reins. Ashvalan come bring up a different proof. Two people who were pulling a camel, or driving a donkey together, or one was pulling and one was driving. They have acquired both the animal in that manner. Says, they did not acquire it till pulling in the case of the camel, driving in the case of the donkey, as that is the manner in which they are normally directed. Telling me is what I see, but sitting in the riding is light. So Mara says that even the case of sitting in the riding position of an animal does affect kinyan. And why does the Brisa teach specifically the case of pulling and driving? The Yehuda to exclude what he says. You have to have dafka, the pulling and the camel driving in this case. Even if it's the opposite, it's okay. So the Gemara says, let's combine the cases and teach them the following. if two people are pulling or driving either a camel or a donkey, they acquire the respective animal. The fact that this wording is not used is mashma that the first Tana does not entirely disagree with Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, there is one manner of acquisition by which the first Tana concedes to Rabbi Yehuda that one does not acquire the animal if one employs it. As unclear what the manner is. Some say that pulling a donkey, some say the alternative discussion in regards to the Seifa, must be to exclude this case. The opposite. One who drives a camel or pulls a donkey does not acquire the animal. This is the same thing as Rabbi Yehuda. Difference between the two is regards to one manner of acquisition which does not acquire the animal. Some say that according to the first time by pulling a donkey, one does not acquire it. Some say driving a camel does not acquire it.